As the Mayor is not here this evening, he's attending another meeting elsewhere. I'd like to call for a motion for nomination of a presiding officer for tonight's meeting. Mr. Councillor Lalonde.
Is this mine? I would like to propose Mr. Minor.
Do I have a seconder? Monsieur Roy? All in favour? Carried. Mr. Councillor Minor, if you'd like to take the chair in the middle. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Good evening, everybody. Members of council, members of the administration, people from the United Counties. Let me get this. So, at 6:01 p.m., starting the public meeting, you have an agenda in front of you. I would entertain a proposition by Sarah, supported by Paul Emile. Mr. Duval, in favor of the agenda? Unanimous. Disclosure of pecuniary interest in the subject on the agenda. Seeing none, we proceed. Item 4, proposed zoning bylaw amendment, Wilson, file Z05 2023. Madame Laforêt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a brief presentation for Department Report Z05-2023, which is an application for an amendment to the Township's zoning bylaw. So this presentation is part of a public meeting, and a public meeting is a requirement under the Planning Act to provide the opportunity for concerned residents, neighbors, and other interested parties to provide comments on any changes to a zoning for a property. If a person is in attendance, they should register. So the administration has provided a sign-in sheet, I believe, at the counter. And this is important because a person or public body who wishes to make representations to council who doesn't participate in the public meeting may or may not be entitled to make representations or be part of a tribunal process. That is an appeal of council's decision regarding a proposed zoning bylaw amendment. So this application is one that council sees quite often. It is an application to change the zoning from an R1 to an R2. I feel like this has been a very frequent type of application that council has considered, but it's one that's going to become more common as we densify some areas within our villages. And so this one is designed with the intention of building a semi-detached dwelling. It's also going to be frequently common that when we see new builds for semi-detached or multi-dwelling developments, that we'll start to see more accessory buildings be incorporated into the design of those units. And council, of course, might be familiar with this site because it was subject to a severance application earlier this year. So this is the property. The parcel looks very small compared to the lot. One of the things that council would consider when looking at this is that the entire parcel is within the urban boundary of Van Cleek Hill, but only a portion of the site is currently zoned R1. The majority of the site is actually Zone D, which isn't a zoning that council is seeing too often. D is a type of zoning for future development. The zoning hasn't been quite defined yet, and it's intended that there would be like a market study and an analysis, and that an application for, let's say, a subdivision there would be a proposal at that time to further define the zoning. But if we get into the closer map of this particular site, you see the severances are the parcels in pink. And this one is the property that's subject to the severance application, and this is the one that the property owner has proposed to rezone from R1 to R2. So when we look at the zoning of this property, so in this case, council is aware that we're not looking at the lot creation specifically. What we're looking at is the zoning change from R1 to R2. And so in terms of intensification, we rely on some of the direction within the provincial policy statement, and that says that our villages are the center for receiving intensification, development, and infill. And so this is really where we want to see development occur. And that includes changes of the zoning that would intensify the use. Again, we look at the UCPR. They have provided some principles for settlement areas, directing growth and development in areas where there's water and sewer infrastructure, and those are our settlement areas, pretty much. And again, the policies really want us to provide a very broad range of housing types. I don't know if council's walked along Pendleton Street, but there's a variety of houses there, and it kind of makes it an interesting street to visit. So this is Champlain Township's official plan, which provides further direction on the mix of land uses within the settlement areas. Here we can see, I just put a little star for the subject property, but you can see that it's in an area which is like light yellow, and those light yellow areas are low-density residential land use areas. And as you can see, that low-density land use area is like the largest proportion of lands within our settlement areas. So it's likely that there's a reason why this is a very frequent application, is because a lot of the land within our urban boundary has that type of land use. So looking again at Champlain Township zoning bylaw, the intention here is to really build a semi-detached dwelling. We look at the lot sizes. The semi-detached development requires 600 meters square of lot area, which is about 300 meters square per semi-detached. A special exception zone is not required in this instance, as we believe the intended development can otherwise conform to the zoning bylaw. And this is the survey sketch provided for the severance application, and it just further illustrates the lot creation and the proposed property lines. So as council is aware, any application to amend the zoning bylaw is subject to notification requirements. In this case, the Planning Act requires notification to neighbors within 120 meters of the subject property, and that would be the subject property before the severance. We err on the conservative side when it comes to notification. So in this case, the notice for this particular zoning amendment was sent to quite a few property owners in Van Cleek Hill, because we used that farm parcel, or that old farm parcel, to set up the boundary. Other than that, there was a notice issued in the newspaper. Administration has not received any inquiries about the proposed rezoning, but if we do receive them before the next council meeting on this, we will provide them in a report. In terms of the next steps, once there's a final decision from council, there's a 20-day appeal period. If you're here in the audience and you're here to listen to this application, we would encourage you to sign in if you want to be, and indicate whether or not you would like to be notified regarding council's decision. So that's it, Mr. Chair. I don't have anything else to add, but I'd be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Madame Laforêt. Any questions from council? Seeing none. Anybody in the public to speak for or against? Okay. This subject will be back at the bylaw section. Item 5, proposed zoning bylaw amendment, housekeeping amendments, file Z-06-2023. Madame Laforêt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This application, or this presentation, is for Z-06-2023. This is a housekeeping amendment to the zoning bylaw, which means that it's a township-initiated cleanup or regulatory changes which impact like general provisions and general regulations across Champlain Township. What we feel is that these changes are relatively minor. However, we want to be able to review them with council before, we want to provide the public and council the opportunity to ask questions about these proposed changes. So a public meeting is a requirement under the Planning Act. Sorry, I'm not sure what happened here. Let me see. Sorry, I just want to make sure my screen is sharing properly here. There we go. So a public meeting is a requirement under the Planning Act, just as the previous application, and is designed to provide the public with opportunity to ask questions and comments about proposed changes to the zoning bylaw. If a person wishes to make comments or provide comments but doesn't present themselves at the public meeting, they may not necessarily be entitled to be added to a party at the local or the Ontario Land Tribunal. This obviously is intended to get people to participate in the public meeting process and not just simply wait for their opportunity to appeal at the end. So if you're here and you're wishing to obtain a copy of the decision or provide comments, we would encourage any members of the public to fill in the sign-in sheets on the desk near the door. So as noted, this particular application proposes to modify several sections of the zoning bylaw. The amendments are brought forward as a result of project experience, so things that we've noticed have been frequent applications for minor variances, feedback from the development community regarding things that are challenging to adhere to, frequent requests, and also to help bring the zoning bylaw into closer alignment with some of the direction of the new official plan. I just wanted to note also that it's likely that a subsequent housekeeping amendment will be required to bring our zoning bylaw into full compliance with the new official plan. And that's just take a little bit longer to update the maps and schedules because of the broad changes, especially in those rural and agricultural areas. So this is like the boring part of the presentation, but we have to do it, so we'll try to outline everything that's changing here. I just want to also note that we provided a copy within the staff report of the bylaw with text changes in red to give council an idea of the regulation changes as worded, but also within context of the overall bylaw. So the first change to note is with regards to the agricultural use definitions. This is just to kind of provide a use definition that is in closer alignment with those, with the UCPR official plan and with kind of the policy direction around primary, secondary, and accessory uses for these lands. In terms of the other text changes, we have changes to definitions. One thing that we wanted to add, or that has been on the table for a while, are some minor updates to the landscaped area, and that would include considerations for amenity area. So currently in Champlain's zoning bylaw, there's not a lot of direction provided for the minimum landscaped area, especially for R3, like apartment-style developments. Our view on this is that developers that would be coming in to develop these kinds of projects would have similar experience in those types of, with projects where those types of features are requirements. And so it's a little bit of a gray zone in terms of what our maximums or minimums should be. But the amenity area is important because, especially as we're possibly over the next few years going to see more intensification, larger like row houses, stacked row, and apartment dwellings. That amenity area provides the outdoor space dedicated to the unit. So it can be a balcony, a common terraced area, but it really does support the livability of some of these developments and should be considered by council. Other use definitions, again, forestry operation is just, it's a use definition that's referred to in the bylaw, but we just wanted to make sure we were consolidating some of the language in there. This is an interesting one. So council will notice that we have new definitions proposed for light, medium, and heavy industrial uses. And that's just to clarify that our business parks are really for light uses, and then something medium and heavy use would be done by special exception zoning. That just provides us a little bit more flexibility if we've got a use that isn't specifically in the bylaw, but is very compatible with the existing businesses, let's say in a business park. Some minor tweaks to the definition of parking lot commercial, short-term rentals, pools and air conditioners within side yards. I know our building department has had some challenges trying to cite those on lots. Sometimes it's kind of tricky. Second dwellings, we've tried to bring the language within our bylaw as close to the ministerial direction as we can, trying to interpret it a little bit and provide clear distinction between like a fully serviced situation and a settlement boundary, and a situation where there's a residence on a rural lot without services. What else have we got here? Landscaped open space. So again, landscaped open space is slightly different than amenity area, but they're both kind of working in conjunction with each other. Required parking. So this is where council is probably going to see and zone in on a little bit on the fine grain here. When it came to required parking schedules, we felt that the parking ratios for multi-unit dwellings were a little bit high, and so things like apartments requiring 2 parking stalls per dwelling unit was going to be a challenge in terms of site area. I don't, my impression is that there's not a lot yet of interest in underground parking facilities, and that would be possibly cost prohibitive for a developer coming in wanting to build a multi-unit development. And so our position is that especially for small dwelling units, of 1 dwelling unit plus visitor parking would be a more appropriate ratio to apply to a multi-unit development. Otherwise, there's a slight increase into some commercial uses depending on the location. Recognizing that some uses require or have a big impact on parking. There might be some increases also to recreational uses. Of course, this is not applied to existing developments, and I just want to make sure council understands that the parking ratios are applied only to new enclosed commercial floor area. Parking stall design, again, there's some text changes trying to structure that section of the bylaw so it's a little easier to interpret. Outdoor commercial patio, some provisions. I think over the last few years with COVID, we've seen outdoor commercial patios just grow in scale. There's a lot of market demand, and with that comes applications for these types of facilities. We just wanted to provide some density limitations and some further design-specific criteria on setbacks and things like that to clean that up. Development adjacent to railways, we've incorporated the new federal guidelines that were also included in the update to the UCPR official plan. The language is much more clear, and it makes it easier for rural properties to build residential development without having to construct berms, although it does in some situations give us the authority to ask for studies and noise and vibration reports when we think it's required. Development on lands with slope condition. We just want to tweak the bylaw in this section to make it clear that what we're looking for are slope stability reports and geotechnical. Again, the language here isn't a big change from what our current practice is. It just tweaks the language to make sure that we're referencing, for instance, the correct bylaw, and that we're getting the right studies for development on lands that have slopes and other erosion risks. Shipping containers. So we do have a lot of demand for shipping containers on rural and agricultural lands, and our feeling is that they still should not be standalone developments, but that they would be appropriate if somebody had a farm diversified use. So if I've got a warehouse and that's related to my agricultural business and I need to have a shipping container, in that situation, it would be supported. Our our regulations would be updated to allow for a maximum of 2. Currently, the bylaw does not clarify how many shipping containers may be permitted, but that is a regulation that we saw in other jurisdictions that we thought might be appropriate here. High-density residential, we're adding a permitted use, which is stacked row housing, and that is a row house that's that has units one on top of the other. Oftentimes, they'll still share the same wall. They'll go all the way up to separate the units. But it's a form of development that that's becoming increasingly common, and we just wanted to make sure we were capturing that in the list of permitted uses. Again, in this section, we're adding a regulation for a dedicated amenity area, and that's just to help make sure that we're getting a little bit of outdoor spaces for each of those units. Increase to minimum lot size. Again, this is following the direction of the new official plan. So it's not just because we're putting it in our bylaw that that's the standard. We're making sure that our bylaw matches what the current plan requires. And this is just, again, as a result of provincial direction on severances. The commercial highway zones, just again cleaning up those uses, making sure that there's clear distinction between a contractor shop, a landscaping business. Sometimes we've had difficulties kind of distinguishing between somebody cutting the lawn and somebody storing aggregates on their property or things like that that would not be appropriate maybe in a residential setting. Commercial use zone, here we've got, just again, trying to remove agricultural related business uses that are a little bit repetitive to try to get a clear distinction between a primary agricultural use, an accessory agricultural use, and then one that would be like a non-farm diversified. So this is just in keeping with the changes to the use definitions. Same thing with the commercial village zone, industrial restricted zone. Here, this is our business park zone, industrial restricted zone. What we're doing is we're just removing the ML5 and ML6 designations. We're rescinding those special exception zones because for this specific property, it's always been interpreted as a general zone. It's a kind of a holdover from a previous amendment, and so we're just clarifying those uses and removing some heavy industrial uses from that property. Heavy industrial zone, again, add those medium, industrial medium use or industrial heavy use as permitted uses. It's important to note that we don't have a large inventory of lands within Champlain Township that are zoned for heavy industrial. So if somebody had a project, they would likely require a zoning amendment. And that would trigger a site-specific review by council. Same thing with the industrial rural zone. The agricultural zone, again, following those tiered agricultural uses. Mineral aggregate zone, and so this would be a recommendation to allow agricultural buildings including agricultural uses including buildings. So currently we're not allowed to build agricultural buildings. The intent with that is to require a zoning amendment so that we can evaluate the impact to aggregate resources before council issues approval. There would still be a review regarding the preclude or hinder aggregate policy, but they would not trigger the requirement for a zoning amendment. And finally, just the map change related to that special exception zone that we mentioned earlier. So in terms of financial implications, this is a section of the report, there is none. Because these are kind of procedural amendments. In terms of notification, there's no requirement to notify every property owner under the Planning Act because it would be prohibitive to do so. However, we do publish it in the newspaper and invite people to comment on the proposed changes. There's a 20-day appeal period for anyone who has concerns with regards to the proposed changes to the zoning bylaw. If you're here in the audience, hello, and you have any comments regarding these proposed changes, please let me know. We'd be happy to discuss and hear your concerns. If you wish to be notified, please fill in the sign-in sheet, and we'll make sure to give you a copy of council's decision either way. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have anything else to add, but I'd be happy to answer questions.
Est-ce que, Madame Laforêt, c'est vous qui avez passé au travers chacun des bylaws, puis évalué les changements apportés, puis qui recommandé tout ça? Ou c'est quoi qui est arrivé de l'extérieur?
J'avais toujours une liste de les choses que je voulais corriger. Excuse-moi. Et puis, je voulais m'assurer que j'avais la chance d'apporter des changements où on pouvait éviter, si nécessaire, d'avoir des changements de zonage qui étaient apportés au conseil pour des choses qui sont relativement mineures. Pour des affaires comme, par exemple, un shipping container, je veux que ça soit clair qu'est-ce qu'on pourrait autoriser puis qu'est-ce qui serait pas. Je voudrais éviter comme des dérogations mineures ou un changement à la politique, ce serait peut-être plus favorable pour le processus d'administration. Fait que c'est une combinaison de les politiques ont changé, il y a des recommandations d'administration et puis des directives au niveau de la province puis au niveau fédéral où la politique a changé un petit peu puis on pourrait corriger des choses au niveau de l'administration.
Alors, si je comprends bien, vous avez passé au travers chacun des bylaws, puis amené les modifications qui s'imposent, c'est ça?
Oui.
Beaucoup de travail, sans doute.
Oui.
Monsieur Burroughs?
Je crois, Monsieur le Président, que M. Poisson voulait adresser une matière. Ah, mais j'ai aucune question.
Quelqu'un d'autre? Question? Non? Si vous voulez, s'il vous plaît, donnez votre nom et posez votre question.
Tu peux juste taper ses points.
Ah, OK. Bon, ben moi, c'est Mario Poisson. Je reste dans le centre des Îles. Je suis zoné commercial rural. Je voulais juste savoir si tous ces changements-là, si ça va m'affecter moi ou parce que je suis déjà considéré, on s'est rencontrés avant aussi. Ça va rester là, ça, nos ententes, ou ça va tout être changé là, avec ça?
C'est une bonne question. Je veux pas parler des propriétés spécifiques, mais je peux vous dire qu'on va pas enlever vos droits commerciaux. C'est un zonage qui a été accordé par le canton de Champlain, ça fait plusieurs années.
Oui.
Fait que ça a été reconnu, puis ça va pas changer par rapport à les changements qu'on a apportés aujourd'hui.
Puis ce qu'on s'est parlé à notre dernière rencontre, ça va rester là aussi?
Oui.
OK. C'est juste ça que je voulais savoir. Merci.
Merci. Pas d'autres questions? J'en aurais une, possiblement. Dans la section Required Parking, on sait que dernièrement, on a eu une situation dans Ventlikill, une construction de plusieurs logis. Est-ce que ça l'affecte eux autres?
Le stationnement pour, si je ne me trompe pas, c'est-tu Habitation Robert ou c'est-tu un projet pour des appartes?
Ventlikill Manor.
Ventlikill Manor. Fait que oui, il y a une section du règlement, je pense que c'est 3.30, c'est la table avec tous les aires de stationnement qui sont requis pour les développements. On avait recommandé que ça soit baissé, mais les projets qui ont déjà été accordés, sont approuvés déjà. Fait que Ventlikill Manor avait préparé un site plan, puis ils ont donné le parking qui était nécessaire sous le règlement de zonage qu'on avait avant. Mais qu'est-ce qu'on a proposé, c'est pour les appartes, pour les résidents qui vieillissent, que les aires de stationnement pour ces types de développements-là se diminuent. En fin de compte, le compte qu'on a pour ça, pour cette utilisation-là, c'est 0.3, c'est 0.33 par unité. Puis c'était les stationnements qui étaient requis dans le vieux règlement de zonage de Ventlikill. Fait qu'on n'a pas juste sorti ça de nulle part. On a aussi fait une petite recherche par rapport à qu'est-ce que les autres municipalités vont vont vouloir voir avec leurs projets d'aménagement qui sont semblables. Puis c'était toujours le 0,3. On trouvait que 2 aires de stationnement, c'était beaucoup de stationnement pour un type d'usage. Fait qu'on propose aujourd'hui de diminuer ça un petit peu. C'est toujours le droit du requérant aussi d'aller chercher plus de stationnement que qu'est-ce que le règlement de zonage exige.
Merci beaucoup. S'il n'y a pas d'autres questions, on passe à une résolution.
Je ne suis pas familier avec mon anglais, ben, là. Mais ça veut dire que tous ces règlements-là, ça va être effectif dans 20 jours ou c'est effectif comme c'est là?
C'est une bonne question. Fait qu'aujourd'hui, avec la rencontre publique, c'est une présentation des règlements qu'on propose de changer. S'il n'y a pas de changement à apporter, le Conseil va supporter une première lecture du règlement. Il y a une autre rencontre du Conseil, puis après ça, il y a une période de 20 jours. Fait que ça va être quelques mois avant la période d'appel est complétée.
Merci. Alors, at this stage, I would take a resolution to adjourn this meeting. Mr. Barton and Mr. Duval. Favor? Unanimous. So we are adjourning this public meeting. We'll be back in a short little while with the regular meeting.